some of us.
I know. I looked at Sonja.
So she tweaked this out.
Yeah, since like October, because I was going to do it in October, and then he texted me.
But hopefully we'll have fun and you'll learn a couple new things, and I'm so excited and honored by your presence here, especially the kids, and some of you kids have read my book, and you may have a chance to win a prize a little bit later, just something small. But I will be talking about my best friends here, Sophie and Timley, a little pirate wannabe mouse, who go on a big adventure together. When my daughter, Stephanie, I've got two daughters, Stephanie and Amanda, and the oldest one, when she was in the 7th grade, she came home from school, one of the first days of school, and said, "There's a mother-daughter book club starting. Could we join it?" And I said, "Well, sure. That sounds like fun." And we did, and we were in it for several years until high school busyness took over and we had to stop. But we had a lot of fun reading books we might not have chosen on our own, and hearing people's reactions to different books and hearing their different viewpoints. And one of the things that we kind of had in common was that we felt like a good book was one that the main character changed a lot through the course of the story. And a really good book was one where we felt we had changed as a result of reading the story. Well, I don't know if anyone will ever be changed as a result of reading Sophie's Quest or one of my other stories, but I sure know that I have been changed in the 15 years since I started this book, and 25 years since I first had kind of a vision of a kleptomaniac owl as a main character, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a little bit. For the most part, I want to talk about this theme of how I feel like I've changed in becoming a better neighbor to our diverse community through the writing and research of this book. I'm not the first one to suggest that fiction can change us for the better. President Obama is sitting here with novelist Marilyn Robinson for a New York Review of Books interview. And he said, "When I think about how I understand my role as citizen, setting aside the notion of being president and the most important set of understandings that I bring to that position of citizen, the most important stuff I've learned, I think I've learned from novels. It has to do with empathy. It has to do with being comfortable with the notion that the world is complicated and full of grays, but there's still truth there to be found, and that you have to strive for that and work for that, and the notion that it's possible to connect with someone else even though they're very different from you." Psychologists even agreed with President Obama, and a couple of years ago, in 2014, there was a study that showed that children can indeed learn empathy through reading fiction and identifying with characters in a story. So before I tell you more about kind of what I learned and how I changed, I feel like I better tell you a little bit more about the story and how it came to be, because that's all tied together. Sophie and Timley are on a quest to seek the truth still there to be found. And first of all, Sophie would like everyone to know that it was not her fault that Timley Mouse crawled into her hat brim the day she decided to fly on board a ship bound for the Holy Land. Thorns and thistles! What makes a mouse think he can ever be friends with an owl? Well, aboard the ship they do, and Timley thinks fast, offers his help to Sophie on her quest, saying he can crawl into tiny spaces. He can be ears and eyes where she cannot go. And she decides, at least for the moment, she will not eat him. And she's on a quest because she has found this cross necklace in the park. She likes shiny and pretty things. And she wonders what it's about. She sees crosses on tops of big buildings. She sees people wearing them. And she asks her grandfather what it is. He's the great wise horned owl. He knows all about everything. And he says, "You know what? It's a T for trouble, and it's best to leave that alone." Sophie sees some evidence to the contrary and decides to find out for herself, which leads her to boarding a ship that's bound for the Holy Land, because her grandfather had once said it was considered a holy symbol by some people. Well, in the Holy Land, they face a treacherous raven, visit a mosque and a synagogue, mail a letter to God in a special wall, create mayhem in a Jerusalem market, meet a sheepdog in Bethlehem and a yoga-practicing monkey, And all along the way, they have an encounter with a mysterious presence that they nickname Sky Painter, who seems to be leading them right into trouble. Well, in the telling of such a tale, I'm really hoping that kids will feel heard and respected, whether or not they adhere to one of the religions that they encounter in the story, or none at all, where it's all new to them and they can maybe relate to some of the questions and doubts and fears of the main characters. I really am hoping that they will feel, as President Obama said, that it's possible to connect with someone else even though they're very different from you. So I have to start at the very beginning. This is me, Little Red Riding Hood, at my mom's Mother Goose party. That's my mom. We all had to dress up like a storybook character. I was probably 4 or 5 years old. And you can see how intently I was looking at that book. I have always, my entire life, loved to read, loved to write as soon as I knew how to write, and kept a diary through graduate school until I decided I was taking myself and all of my thoughts way too seriously. And then I kind of stopped. But anyway, I've always been a reader and writer, and that's kind of factored into wanting eventually to write a book. Well, as Dorothy said, I grew up, majored in history in college, went to graduate school, got a master's degree in education, and then I followed a lifelong dream to live overseas. And I lived in Japan for 3 years, where I taught kindergarten for a year and second grade for 2 years. And the kids were from all over the world. You can see one of my second grade classes here, and they were literally from everywhere. And as the new teacher, I was given the job of teaching the multi-faith class that parents were requesting. It was a Catholic school, so there was a Catholic group and a Protestant group, but the parents had been saying, you know, could we have a multi-faith group too? There were Jewish children and Muslim children at the school, and Hindu. They were really from everywhere, like I said. So as the new teacher, I was given the class without any curriculum, that means kids without a plan. There was no expectation of a plan. There was no, you know, this is what we think you should do. This was just, you know, here, could you do this? So I started rounding up as many stories as I could from the different major world religions and tried to find things that I could share with them that, you know, I thought were good and full of, you know, parts of the stories that I could relate to in some way or share with them that was interesting. And I listened to the kids tell me their stories. They brought in various things, like the Jewish boy brought in a dreidel, and I don't know if you guys have seen one of those for Hanukkah. There's like Hebrew written on the sides of it, and they play a game, and there's chocolate coins at Hanukkah. And I saw one of those for the first time. There was a Muslim boy that brought in Islamic music, and we all listened to that together. There was a boy that scandalized everyone because he didn't eat lunch for days on end, and the kids were telling me, my name at that time was Miss Young, and they're like, Miss Young, Shahrinan didn't bring a lunch, you know, he's not eating. And we all learned about Ramadan, a Muslim season of fasting where they don't eat during daylight hours. So we all learned a lot together. Mostly the kids brought me their questions and a huge desire to know what was true. After a particularly good story, I would hear the questions, you know, and see the hands. Is that true, Miss Young? Is that a true story? They really wanted to know. At the same time that I was teaching at this school, I had a really good friend named Yuri, and she was a Japanese college student at the time who had been a high school student back in my family's home in Ohio when I was in graduate school. So I would go home on vacations and get to know her. She was with them for about a year. Well, when I moved to Tokyo, she also moved to Tokyo as a college student, and we became really close friends. And one of the things she did was constantly ask me questions. She wanted to know everything about my culture, my background, more about my family, my beliefs, and she wrote a paper one time in college. She called me up on the phone and said, I'm doing a paper comparing Buddha and Jesus, and can you tell me more about, Jesus for my paper? So I did, and her interest in me and my culture made me feel special and welcomed, and I never forgot that, and that will factor in a little bit later to how I feel like this project has made me a better neighbor as well to those that are new in our country and different around us. Well, it was at this time, teaching in Tokyo, being faced with all these questions, that I thought of my little owl who collected things, collected holy treasures, various necklaces of Buddha or the cross or rosary beads or, prayer rugs, anything that an owl can hang on to, because I thought, wouldn't it be great? Owls are supposed to be wise. Couldn't an owl help me answer all these questions and put all of these various symbols of different religious traditions in some kind of perspective, answer our questions for us? But I did nothing with that. And about 10 years later, I found myself living here in Seattle, married to my wonderful husband, Jeff. And we had a daughter named Stephanie. And she had, I couldn't resist, she's in her little Red Riding Hood costume, about the same age. And she had a discussion on the elementary school playground about whose God was biggest. She was talking to some friends of different backgrounds, and I'm glad to say they're all still friends. I have seen that on Facebook, and that makes me feel good. And I guess I just want you guys to be forewarned, if a child starts arguing about God at age 5 on the school playground, you might as well start saving for their theology degree right now, because that's what I'm paying for personally with Stephanie in college at the moment. But it was there that this owl came flashing back to my mind. I thought, what can I write that would help Stephanie understand her friends better and would help her friends understand her better without it being an argument on the playground? So this was a really scary idea. How do you talk about religion with anyone, let alone kids? How do you write a book? If you can imagine, I had been a reader, like I said, my entire life, but you look at a blank screen, you look at a blank piece of paper, right, Katie? How easy is it to write when you're looking at something blank, Yeah, it's not easy. And so my big idea required a lot of prayer. I was really, really quite scared about writing it. I read a quote by Madeleine L'Engle. She wrote the book called A Wrinkle in Time. We have it in our library at school. And probably about almost a year had gone by, and this idea of writing this book was just kind of eating me up. It wouldn't let me go, and it was growing instead of going away. And Madeleine L'Engle said, you have to write the book that wants to be written. And if the book will be too difficult for grown-ups, then you write it for children. That felt like it suited me to a T. It suited my topic, and it suited this compelling, overwhelming drive to write the book. The 9/11 happened, a year after the argument on the playground. Stephanie called me from the living room. I was in the kitchen, and she was in the living room building with her blocks. And she said, Mom, look at what I did. So I go around the corner to our living room, and there's the 2 towers out of blocks. And she said, look. And she flew her hand right through the middle of them. This is just 1 week after 9/11 happened. The towers crashed. I burst into tears. She burst into hilarious laughter. She thought it was awesome. And I didn't know how to handle that. And I thought, it's time. Ready or not, it's time. I need to write something, because children see that something big has happened. They are paying more attention to the news than I thought she was. I thought we had kind of shielded her, protected her from this big event in the country to some extent, and found out, nope, not so much. She knew something had happened, didn't understand. And not that my book was going to explain 9/11, but I felt like it was time to start a conversation with our children about differences and about learning to understand one another and to somehow learn to care about each other, even if we believe differently. So my prayers became much more urgent. I was sitting in church and still not sure how to begin this project, and I realized my children in this children's choir were singing, I don't need to have the plan in hand. I don't need to have the end in sight. All I need to do is follow you and do what you tell me to. And I realized I had a big God who could lead me through this wilderness of publishing and writing, step by step. All I needed to do was follow the next step. I'm really glad I didn't have the end in sight, because if I knew then it was going to be 15 years later that I'd be able to hold my book up in my hands, I don't know if I would have had the nerve to write the first word. But that got me started. So it was time to get busy. I spent a lot of time at the public library. My kids were in ballet, and I would run them to the ballet studio in Burien and then dash over to the Burien library and get a stack of books on everything from owls and mice, how they fly, what they can hear, the distances, everything like Islam and Judaism and Buddhism and Hinduism, the layout and rigging of modern clipper ships, topography and vegetation of Israel, pirate lingo, and sometimes all of these at once. And the librarian would look at me and say, "That's an interesting stack of books you have." And I'd say, "Yes," and it all goes together in one project. And I don't think she really believed me. The time frame for writing the book was 5 to 6 years of this kind of research and writing and rewriting to get a decent draft. 3 years of submitting to find a publisher. And at the same time, I was submitting my book to friends and critique partners, and thank you, some of you guys are here today. And they helped me to make it better and better. And a publisher did say yes, and said she loved it, and her daughter read it and loved it, and she wanted to publish it. And I waited and waited. And there might be 9 months in between emails and promises, and then it was 4 years had gone by of still waiting. So since I did not have a contract, I kept looking for another publisher. And in 2013, I made my first contact with this British publisher, Sunpenny Publishing, and 2 years later, this past summer, they published my novel, and then the sequel is coming out at the London Book Fair in April, Sophie Top Feather Superstar. So if you've added any of that up, you can tell it's like 15 years has gone by. Stephanie was 5 when I started. She is now 21. So why keep at it? What was so important? Well, I was having a lot of fun learning new things. There's a lot of fun to be had in Seattle. I would go to the zoo on self-imposed field trips and watch the bird handlers with their big leather gloves and have them talk about the owls and eagles and other raptors. And I would watch the ships going by. We attended a church downtown at that time, and so a couple times a week I was driving right through the container shipyards there on 99 on the way to the viaduct, and I'd start watching out the window, looking to see what kind of activity there was, because container ships factor into the story. And I started feeling a much greater part of my city. I started feeling, interested in the mariner life and in the, what was going on here, and in nature and the animals, paying so much more attention to things like that. Well, this picture here was the most fun day I've ever had researching. I felt like a spy in a novel with a Catholic priest who helped me get on board, put a volunteer badge on my chest. He was with the Seamen's Mission down on the waterfront, and he was a connection through the former librarian at my school. And she found out that I wanted to go on board one of these ships because I've been watching them and paying attention, and I just longed to see what they were like, and because the characters go on board one. Well, I had this amazing day because The priest helped me ask my questions because I couldn't bring a clipboard on board. He said, no, the captain will be nervous about that you're some kind of inspector if you carry a clipboard. So you just kind of observe what you need to observe, and I'll help you ask the questions. So we sat with the captain of this ship and talked about the men from all over the world who work on the boats. I got to meet some of them, like this young man from Fiji, and I got to hear some of their fears and concerns. The fact that sometimes these young men are abused on the ships. They don't speak the same language as each other. They are far away from home and any kind of protection there. They are afraid of pirates. And in the course of writing this book, there's been news of pirates in various oceans around the world. And I always think of these young men and wonder, oh, I hope they're not on board one of those ships. But it helped me to feel more connected to my community and to Seattle and to this different life coming from Ohio. Like you said, Dorothy, I grew up in Ohio, and boating was not a part of my world at all. So I learned a lot of other things too. And at this point, I would like to have a little game or quiz. Go to the next slide. And some of you have read my book, so you might even know what this wall is, or where it might be, or what people do there, or what these little pieces of paper are that are stuck in the cracks. And Katie, I think you know something, anything. What can you tell me about that wall?
Isn't it from Jerusalem?
Yes, it is indeed.
Oh.
Would you like a page of owl stickers or a bookmark, magnetic bookmark?
You're right. There you go.
Yes, this is anybody know anything else about this wall? Do you want to share?
Wishing wall?
The wailing.
Okay, not wishing wall. You were close with the W, but you said it wailing wall. Would you like a magnetic bookmark?
Oh, thank you very much. Nice.
Of course, with an owl on it. Yes, it's the Western Wall, or the Wailing Wall, the last standing wall of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. And those little pieces of paper are prayers. Can you see them? They're these little white papers stuck in here. And people can write prayers and put them in the wall. They feel closer to God at that spot, since it had been their temple. And I have heard you can even go online and send a rabbi somewhere a prayer, and he will put a little paper in the wall. So you can Google that or Bing that if you want. Another Jewish tradition that I learned about is from this. It's got holes on the top and bottom, a little hollow on the inside. It's in the story, but it very briefly, so I will not hold it against you if you don't remember. Anybody? Okay.
Mezuzah?
What?
Is it a mezuzah? Is that
Yes! Oh my goodness. Well, do you want another bookmark? No. Yes, there you go.
What is it used for? I've forgotten that.
I will tell you. Page, have what you like. Yeah. So what the Jewish people do with this is they write, I think they have a rabbi write what's called the Shema in it on a little piece of paper, and they roll it up and put it inside, and then they nail it to the door frame. And the Shema is a verse from Deuteronomy, a couple of verses, and it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength." A few verses after that in Deuteronomy it says, "Write them on the door frames," these verses, "on the door frames of your houses and on your gates." And so this is one way that the Jewish people have done that. They write it in here, they put it to their door frame, and I've heard that they always do it at an angle. They don't put the mezuzah straight up and down, and I don't really know why, except that maybe they feel like that reflects how imperfectly we love God.
What is it, mezuzah?
Mezuzah. All right, I got one more. Now this is going to be somewhat difficult, but I'm going to pass these around. Take one, that row, there. Okay, Anyone have any idea what those are?
Prayer beads. I think they're called phylacteries.
Okay, that's not a phylactery as far as I know. It's but it is a prayer bead. Yes. So magnetic bookmark for you as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
Page, can I see that?
Okay.
Is that Jewish as well? Jewish as well?
This is not Jewish. This is Muslim. Muslim prayer beads. And there are 33 beads. There's 11 from like the bottom to the first little flat disc, and then 11 that goes around the top, and 11 more back to the start. Does anybody have any idea? So that'd be 33 beads, and they go around it 3 times. And so that would make 99. Does anybody know what there's 99 of in the Muslim tradition? This isn't in the book, but something fun I learned along the way. It's the 99 names for Allah.
Oh.
Fun fact. And it's called and I'm probably pronouncing this wrong, but Mizbaha. So, end of our quiz time. But you can look at the beads. Sophie liked pretty things, so the beads do factor into the book. I learned a little bit about Buddhism because I meet a yoga practicing monkey who tries to show Sophie a way to have peace, and was struck by the so many ways that they try so hard to do things right. The right view, right intentions, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right concentration, right mindfulness, and realize that in the Buddhist tradition, they are working very hard also, along with like the Muslims in their prayer life. So all of these things helped me a lot to learn more about the diversity in our own community, because I was seeing so many of these people here. Oh, yeah, and I want to just mention briefly, Ganesh is a Hindu god who I learned about, and that factors into the story as well. Okay. So, as I was doing all this learning, I found that there's a lot to respect in other people that believe differently than I do. I learned that we all have a care for holy things. They don't touch the Torahs, for example, in the Jewish tradition with their hands. They use pointers. There's special claws that wrap holy books. Kids in the Muslim tradition spend a great amount of time memorizing their holy book. People work really hard to do things, right or pleasing to God. We share a desire for a sense of peace. We share a desire to do good and fix some of what's wrong in the world. We share a desire for a relationship with the eternal or the one who made us. We share a desire to understand what is sacred or holy. Like Yuri, my friend in Japan who was so interested in me, all of my research and this writing has helped me to be more interested and aware of stories all around me. I want to hear the stories of the Coptic Christians, the Orthodox Christians from Ethiopia, the Muslims from Asia and Africa and the Middle East, the Buddhist kids, the Catholic kids from Mexico and South America. I hear stories at my school about Samoan White Sunday. Never heard of that holiday before, but it's very special to the Samoan and Tonga students. A boy in my school was very, very excited about traveling to Mexico for a special baptism. Muslim students have talked to me about the prayer beads and told me that how their mother uses them. And it seems like it only took one kid to realize I was interested in their culture to have like so many students want to share their backgrounds with me. And I feel like it's one thing I can do to show interest in them. Because being a good neighbor means that we care about one another. We are interested in one another. On rare occasions, I've been in the right place at the right time to stop bullying going on. A boy was wearing a crucifix, like a cross necklace with a Jesus hanging on it, and he was being picked on terribly on the football field. And this is years ago. He's no longer there. And his teacher isn't there anymore either, but I talked to his teacher about it, and she was so surprised. She said, but he's Muslim. And I said, well, no. You know, he's a Coptic Christian from Egypt, and he wears a cross every day, and he's being picked on and being called bad names relating to his faith in Jesus. But it was, you know, his skin color and where he was from North Africa. She made assumptions, you know, we all do. So I don't really blame her, but I just feel like having done all this research and studying, it's made me more aware of kind of who the kids are around me, and how maybe I can step in and help them when I hear different situations. Finally, learning all these things has helped me to think about this faith that I have had my whole life side by side with this new learning. And I've realized that there are so many messages from Jesus and his disciples that are truly unique. We are called children of God and heirs of his kingdom. We are assured right now, whether we have earned it or deserve it or not, of salvation and a free gift of this grace. We're promised abundant life. We are promised that God's presence will be with us always. We're told that God sacrificed his very own self because he knew we couldn't ever be good enough, we couldn't ever balance the scales on our own to tip decisively in the good column. We're told to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. And I started developing this enormous sense of compassion for those who have not heard those messages in their lifetime, because they are unique. And I understood really for the first time that the word gospel, you know, means good news. And that is good news, that we have a Father who loves us and calls us his children and wants us to be with him forever, and figured out a way for us to be with him. So to wrap up, and you guys have been such an amazing group of listeners, such an amazing audience, I want to wrap up quoting two of my absolute favorite authors. J.K. Rowling, who spoke at Harvard at commencement in 2008, she said, "Unlike any other creature on this planet, humans can learn and understand without having experienced. They can think themselves into other people's places." C.S. Lewis put it this way. He said, "Each of us by nature sees the whole world from one point of view with a perspective and a selectiveness peculiar to himself. We want to see with other eyes, to imagine with other imaginations, to feel with other hearts as well as our own." It's occurred to me that the mother-daughter book group that I talked about at the beginning forgot to ask a crucial question when we talked about whether or not a character had been changed in the story, or whether we had felt changed as a reader of the story. We forgot to ask whether or not the change in the character or in us was good. So it's my hope and prayer that we may use this power of seeing with other eyes and feeling with other hearts to become better, more compassionate friends and neighbors, whether we believe the same things or agree with one another or not. So thank you very much for listening. Any questions? Yep.
I have a question based on information you already gave me, but what else are you writing? What have you written, and what else are you writing?
Well, I have a few things published. A short story on the friendship between C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, and how that really changed the world through their writing that would not have occurred without their friendship for various reasons. I have a story in an anthology called The Cup of Comfort, Book of Bible Promises, that's available online. Another children's story in a magazine. And then I'm working on the sequel. I just turned that in actually to the publisher last week. And so that'll be out in April. Yes, Katie?
Aren't you writing a crane book?
Yes, Katie, I have a very sad story about Luna Crane Papa Plane. It's a picture book about a whooping crane that needed help to migrate to Florida. And it's become an orphan. You know how the mother is injured in this story. Some of the kids at school have heard this story. And the mother of this poor bird is injured, and they need help to fly to Florida. Well, the publisher that had sent me a contract for this little book was going to publish it, and then they were bought out by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, and my contract did not go with Houghton Mifflin, so the story is orphaned. So I'm back to the drawing board and need to find a new publisher for that one. I'm also working on a historical novel about Japan and the persecuted Christians, who are the bravest people I have ever heard of in my life. They're from the 17th century. Yep.
The publisher for the Crane book.
That was an interactive e-picture book company called Me Genius, and then Houghton Mifflin bought their digital technology and work, yeah.
And
so
the woman who was the
illustrator? Yeah, we're trying to figure out if she can get the rights back to the art. The art was done, it was adorable, and but she was paid for her work as a work for hire arrangement, and so she doesn't own it anymore. So we're trying to figure out if she can get it back, the rights back, so that we can submit it together someplace. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what are the target audiences that you usually write for, and that this particular book, Sophie's Quest, is directed?
That's a good question. This is for ages 8 to 12, and I work in a library, elementary school library, and we've had 5 copies in the library that have been constantly checked out, never made it back to the shelf once this entire year since September. And I'm hearing, which is just a thrill when you work in a library, you know, to see your book checked out. But I guess one of the best thrills for me is to have 8-year-old girls and 12-year-old boys tell me how much they love it. So it does kind of have that range. It would maybe be too hard for a younger child to read by themselves, or even to maybe enjoy being read aloud. But I think 8 to 12 is kind of a sweet spot. Yes?
Can you give us a sample?
Oh, sure. And Chrissy, did you have a question too?
Yeah, I wanted to comment that I'm an adult. I'm a little over 12. And I love the book so many times. I've read it. My mother-in-law, who's even a little older than 12 than me,
Yeah.
she loved the book as well. So I think that, you know, saying it's for children is...
And this weekend it's going going south to Portland to a young woman who is an American Buddhist, who is fascinated by the idea that there could possibly be a nice blend of understanding or interest, you know, within a children's story that just doesn't, those things just don't fit. And so I said, well, let me show you how it's done.
Yeah, well, thank you. And you had a question?
Your book, so it focuses on Christianity, but yet through like other, you know, Muslim, Judaism, all of it, or what?
That's a great question. It's a true seeker's story. The main characters, of course, you know, as an owl and a mouse, have no faith background or history, and so they're asking questions and listening, you know, to various experiences, like what they hear in a mosque or what they hear from a Jewish family celebrating Sabbath, or these kind of like Muslim rituals at a washing before prayer, and then the prayer rituals. So they're wide-eyed and taking in kind of what they see from these different religions, and it's really this mysterious presence, the sky painter, that just seems to be with them and kind of seeking them out, leading them, and they don't understand, of course, who that is, but they sense his presence with them because of various things. And it's not until they actually, at the very end of the book, when they get back to the park, and Grandfather Owl, who has, you know, just called this a tea for trouble at the very beginning, he has bookshelves of books. He knows everything about people, and he listens to Sophie's story, and she and her grandfather discover a Bible on the shelf, and they read some of the stories, and especially the description of Jesus as God Emmanuel with us speaks to Sophie and what they experienced. And then they meet Shep, the sheepdog from Bethlehem, whose ancestors were with the shepherds the night that Jesus was born. And there's like this oral tradition that Shep shares with them about the night Jesus was born and what Jesus did when he was alive. And so they kind of start to put things together. at the end, but I wouldn't say it's overbearingly Christian all throughout. It's more of a
What's your hope to do
seeking.
with this book? What is your main intention with this book?
My main intention is to help children become more interested, better neighbors with each other, that they can be compassionate no matter which background they come from. They can feel like they've been heard and respected in the telling. That I tried to point out things that would certainly they have caused me to respect what I've read, you know, the Muslim children that they see memorizing and showing so much care over their holy scripture. That's something I think a lot of Christian kids who have 6 Bibles and never touch it can learn from. So I tried to find things that I felt like kids could really respect and learn from, to encourage that respect.
How would you take it, like, if there's a child that's a young child, and the mother's, say, Muslim and the father's atheist?
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen any kind of response from the atheists?
You know, that's an excellent question. I have not had a response from an atheist. I have heard Muslim children at my school recommending this book to their friends and family members, and that means a lot to me because it tells me that at some level they feel heard and respected through the book. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I heard it's been a number of years ago that a lot of material printed in the United States is geared toward nine-year-olds because of maybe our less educated population, and maybe that's changed, I don't know. But for that reason, and I haven't read the book, of course, but I would think that there would be a market for your book in adults if it were maybe marketed a little bit differently, have you known, we could, especially with the, and I forget how you worded it, but the topic for today is just right on again.
Thank you.
Our world needs that.
I feel like it's very important that we feel like we are able to maintain our own faith. Like as a Christian, I want to be able to feel free in our society to be a Christian. And I'm worried about freedoms eroding because there's a lot of talk about tolerance, which is great. I think we need to be tolerant of each other and not, attacking each other when we disagree. However, I feel like that's kind of gone heavy on the side of we need to all be the same and then we won't argue. And I just feel like that's really impossible, especially if we go back to what President Obama said and seeking the truth that is still there to be found. If you believe something is true, well, we can't just say, oh, well, I guess I won't believe that because it'll be more peaceful if we all don't really take our faith too seriously. That's been tried in the past, and Christianity has been tried to be stamped out, like this book about Japan I'm talking about. They tried harder than any other government I have ever heard about in my life to completely eradicate Christianity, and yet 200 years later, after the most incredible persecution you could ever imagine, Christians came out of the woodwork when Japan was open to the West, and they had maintained a faith for 200 years without a Bible, a priest, a church to go to. And so I feel like it is important that a character can have a journey and come to some conclusions, but even if they're different than the reader, we're all going to come to things from our own perspective, and people, I'm sure, will come to the end of this and say, I don't know, I learned some new things, but I'm not sure if I agree with Sophie and Timley's conclusions, and that's okay. I'm just excited that I found a publisher who felt like we could publish something that has a specifically Christian ending, because in most children's novels that just doesn't happen.
But how did you get the response of the Muslims? Someone that,
I work for a school, and there are many Muslims in this area, and so they tell me.
Very nice.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. You guys are asking amazing questions. Thank you.
So I wasn't here when you first were introduced and first started, but I did see a little video film on the Historical Society's website. So I wondered if you could, I don't know, maybe if you've already said this, but that you could tell me how it started, and then this very long process of research that you did. It wasn't just that this incident happened on a playground and you work in a public school and can see these things and then wrote a story about it and it happened quickly. There was this very long period of research for you. So the kids that were involved in that original encounter would have had to wait a long, long time just to see this book and even have an inkling that it relates back to that encounter. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. Well, I was telling the group that was here that when a child of your own argues about religion on the playground at the age of 5, you'd better start saving for their theology degree. My daughter is 21 and still arguing or discussing questions about God with all of her friends in college. Yeah, the kids that were involved at that specific incident, I don't know. That daughter has never read this book. My younger daughter loves Sophie, has read it several times. She'll read anything I write, but that's not Stephanie's thing. And that's okay, you know, so it became more of a compelling desire to write something for kids, whether or not those specific kids ever read it.
I was impressed by the slide. I don't know if you could find it for this lady, because you...
How many years?
Oh,
yeah, about all the years and the different directions.
So, about almost 15 years. From a publisher, after not too terribly long, 3 years, that seems like really fast right now. You know, got an email saying, I love it, you know, and my daughter loves it, and I want to publish it. And then 4 years later, there was still no contract. I actually got the contract from that first publisher after I had found out about this other publisher in England that did publish it, and I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw the contract come through the email, and I wrote to this British publisher. She had only had my manuscript for 2 months, but she had requested the full manuscript, so I knew she was somewhat interested. So I wrote to her and I said, I can't believe my eyes. I actually got this contract from this other publisher I had told you about. I need to know your intentions. And she wrote back by 6 a.m. saying, I would love to publish this. And I just trusted door number 2. At that point, I don't even know if I would have been happy with the first one. And then when I saw what the artist that she got, wonderful Maggie Neen, she's a British illustrator, who just, I think, does amazing work. Yeah.
When is the second book coming out?
In April,
And
middle of April, and it's called Sophie Topfeather Superstar, and it's what happens when the characters, now of course fast friends, you know, you can't save each other's lives on several occasions and then just ignore each other when you get home. But her, and it seems to work at first, but an owl really doesn't fit into a mouse world, and a mouse doesn't fit into an owl world very well, and all sorts of more trouble, you know, ensues, and Sophie doesn't know how to handle it, but it's a fun, I think it's a fun ride, so I hope you will enjoy that one too.
Did you ever consider self-publishing during this long period?
I had a lot of people suggesting that I do that, but I really didn't want to, especially on something that is like such a topic as this. I felt like for credibility's sake, I needed to have an outsider who I do not know. I mean, this was a British publisher that I didn't think I'd ever meet, but I'm going to meet them in London in April. So very excited about that. But anyway, I needed somebody to say, I think children should read this, and I'm going to put money behind it. And it took a long time, but I'm glad I waited for that. What?
Can you read to us?
Oh, sure. Okay. Now I've probably dropped my spot here, but no, I know where it is. Okay. So I thought I'd read a part where, that's based on the cover, where the owl at this point, Sophie, does not know that there is a mouse riding in her hat. He has leaped into her hat, hoping for some sense of adventure, some little trip around his world, which he believes will be the park. But Sophie changes that plan drastically. One very large ship had drawn a crowd. It was a tall ship with furled sails. Not 3, not 4, but 5 tall masts stretched toward the sky. An oval-shaped wooden crow's nest crowned the center mast. The loose edges of the furled sails flapped in the light breeze as if to say, the sea, let's go, I want to be at sea." Timley was beside himself with glee. Still not daring to make a sound, he waved his pirate hat wildly in the air and thought, "It's a pirate ship!" A tugboat stood ready to guide the ship, the Princess Clipper, out of the harbor. Lively music stirred the air. The upper deck had a small blue swimming pool in the middle of it. A large banner hung above it. Sophie read the words on it aloud. "Holy Land Tour, hoo-hoo! I don't believe it. Maybe my luck is changing. This ship is sailing to a whole land that is holy. Maybe I can learn everything there is to know about holy things there." The owl sounded breathless with excitement. "Maybe this is the something great that I've been waiting for, something even Grandfather has never done. If I get on this ship and go see this holy land, wherever and whatever it is, Grandfather will never be able to treat me like an owlet again." Timley, unseen in the owl's hat, started to shake. He had never heard Sophie sound so determined and serious about anything before. They'd both lived in the same tree, and he used to hide under her bed to kind of get a glimpse of the outside world. It completely unnerved him. From what she was saying, his teeny tiny adventure was about to take a giant leap into a full-fledged trip of a lifetime. Timley, wondering if he should make a run for it back to the park, looked back at the tall buildings of the city. Morning clouds edged with pink and gold were mirrored in their shiny windows. His green park, his own tree, lay somewhere beyond those buildings. Could I find my way home? But even if I could, every hungry crow and alley cat just waking up for the day would try to chase me down. He looked back toward the ship. Excited, happy people waved goodbye to families and friends on the pier who waved back. They're going on an adventure. He twisted his hat in his hands. I deserve an adventure too. I'm a pirate, blast it, and my ship has come in. I am going to be on it. He slapped his hat back on his head. For a little tiny mouse who had never been more than 10 feet away from his tree in his entire life, and that, he blushed to think, was with his mother, these were the biggest, most rebellious thoughts he had ever had. I will be free, he thought. I will be free. Sophie, meanwhile, looked down at her necklace. It shone bright against her mottled brown wing feathers. Grandfather, hoo-hoo-hooey to you. I'm going to find out about things even you don't know. I don't care how far away I have to go or how long it takes me. And with that, she flew straight to the ship.
You sound like a librarian who's ready.
Right. Thank you so much. You've really honored me today with your presence. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank all of you for being here. Remember